Right, welcome everyone. This is the March edition of the Memphis Astronomical Society General Meeting. We're glad you could make it, and we have a great program lined up for you tonight. We'll start with some preliminaries though. This is our website. You can go to our website, www.memphisastro.org, and join our email mailing list so we can keep you updated on events and news. And you can also just join our organization. If you want to support what we do, we ask for a $25 a year membership fee, and for that, you get to claim to be a member of the Memphis Astronomical Society, which is worth twice that all in itself, and also get our newsletter. So Jeremy had stuff he talked about all through this, I'm sure. If you just want to get on our email mailing list, and membership is not required, you can go to joinmas.com. Enter your name and email address, and we will put you on our email list. We send out maybe 3 emails a month, typically an observing session, go, no-go email, an announcement about the next general meeting and what's in the program, and any outreach events that we're trying to host or sponsor. So, and speaking of that, in the month of March, we have quite a few outreach events planned. We've got Boy Scouts, I think it's Cub Scouts on the 8th. We've got Burton's Sugar Farm tomorrow night. Of course, I'm expecting a no-go call on that. The clouds and rain are moving in. Then next Friday, we've got a couple of different observing events, Germantown Park and Wolf River's Bend, something, I'm not sure. Oh, that's the Germantown Park, I think. Anyway, there's an observing session there. Then we've got one at Pinson Mounds on Saturday. On the 18th of the month, we've got the MAS board meeting. Oh, you don't care about that. And then the Memphis Astrophotography group on Saturday night, the 19th at 7 p.m. That's another Zoom meeting. The link is on our website. So if you're interested in getting started in astrophotography, please join us for those. We try to get the teachers and the learners together. So a lot of the experience being shared there every month. Burton Sugar Farm again on the 26th. And then at the end of the month, we've got a new, our next general meeting, which will be on April 1st, will be at the Pink, well, it's not called the Pink Palace anymore. It's called the Memphis MOSH. I don't remember what it stands for. It's the Pink Palace for those of you that live here and know it so often. And their planetarium, we're going to be meeting in the planetarium. So that'll be a first for us. We'll see where that goes, but should be pretty exciting. We need scopes. So if you want to volunteer at some of these public events, please let our VP of Observing, Mark Matthews, get in touch with him, or any of us actually, if you want to bring a scope out to one of these events and help us show the wonders of the night sky to those less privileged to have a telescope. And as again, I mentioned, on March 19th, we'll have a Memphis Astrophotography group. We are, did we come up with a topic for this month, Freddie? I don't remember. I know we're going to start trying to outline targets for the month. And I think tonight's program might come up with some interesting ideas for new targets for us. So looking forward to hearing Gary in a few minutes. If you know of an organization that would like to have the Memphis Astronomical Society present show telescopes or do an indoor presentation about astronomy or cosmology, let us know. We have a form on our website that you can fill out, and we have a wonderful outreach committee that will help coordinate some volunteer to come out and help put on whatever kind of event you got in mind. I'd like to welcome new members that have joined in the last month or so. We're starting with Stuart McVeigh. Welcome to the Memphis Astronomical Society. Joe Richardson, welcome. And I don't know, I think Jeremy generally has some information about everyone. I don't have it. So welcome, Joe. That's all I can do. Cooper Mears, welcome to the Memphis Astronomical Society. Tom Skermetti, welcome. I hope I didn't butcher your last name too bad. John Jernigan, welcome to the MAS. And this is what our wonderful, gorgeous newsletter looks like. You know, you'd read this and think we were professionals or something. So Steve, thank you for the wonderful layout work you do on this, but we have a monthly newsletter that's suitable for printing, and leave it on your coffee table. All right, so we are, like I said, we are getting back live. We're not sure exactly how this is going to go. We're going to start out this month. This is an image of where we used to meet. This is the Science Auditorium at Christian Brothers University. They have not opened that back up to public use yet. So we've been able to make a deal with the Pink Palace Planetarium, where we will meet next month for the first time in person. So, and that'll be at 8 o'clock. We will record the meeting and have it available on YouTube the next day. We haven't figured out yet how to do a Zoom meeting at the same time, but we're going to give it a try. So keep your eyes on our website for a Zoom meeting link if you can't make it to Memphis or make it into town to the planetarium, or simply just don't want to. But we will be at the planetarium this month. And that's a picture of what it looks like in the planetarium. And it's not an April Fool's joke, even though it is on April 1st. Well, I don't want to chew up a lot more of our time. So tonight's program is photographing the Arp Catalog of Galaxies. I was unaware of this catalog and didn't understand its significance till I understood it was interacting galaxy triplets. And that really caught my eye, and I think this is going to be fascinating. So Gary, Gary M is in Onalaska, Texas, and is it M or I'm? What is it, Gary? You can unmute. So
my first Zoom experience, so it's exciting for me.
Well, take it away, grab the screen, and thank you very much. Y'all welcome Gary M.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's a real honor to be part of this forum. As we talked about a little bit in the pre-meeting about 5 years ago, I may have been in the same place that many of you were. I enjoyed using my telescopes for observing, but and I really thought, I really had no desire to do astrophotography. My son kept bugging me to say, "Hey, Dad, this is something you really should look into." And I kept telling him, "No, I mean, I want to see the stars with my eyes. I want to look through the eyepiece. That's really what it's about, is really doing it yourself with your own eyes." So I blew him off for a number of years, and then I finally got started. And now, as you'll see, I'm pretty obsessed with the whole thing. So in the last 5 years, I've tried to get up the learning curve quickly, and I try to spend all of my clear sky time. I'm retired. I'll go through that here in a second. But basically, as of this date, I've imaged about 1,600 different space objects out there, DSOs, and it's been just a joy, a pleasure. It's brought me a lot of companionship in terms of meeting other people around the world. Everything I show you tonight's on Astrobin. So if you like an object or you see an object you like, I also have a spreadsheet of about 600 of the objects that I think are good, kind of introductory objects to different classes, galaxies and nebula. And I send that to people that are looking for targets. So if anybody wants that, I'm certainly happy to send that spreadsheet to them as well. So with that, I'm going to launch into my presentation here. I'm going to try that anyway. So let's see if this works. So are you able to see my first screen? Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah, we got it.
So I actually changed the subject here. So I'm going to talk about the ARP objects, obviously, but a lot of this is really imaging what I call long focal length targets. And so I have 3 different main telescopes. I've got an 85, TAC 85, 85 millimeter, like 4-inch telescope, which is the most fun to image with. I call that a short focal length. And then I've got about 1,000 millimeter, it's 130 millimeter aperture telescope, and that's kind of medium. And then I've got the one you see in the picture here, which is a Celestron 11, and that is what's called an Edge HD, and that's a 2,800 millimeter. And there are a lot of challenges that come with imaging with long focal length telescopes. It's a lot more difficult. It's a lot less fun. But it opens up a whole new world of objects, because you can zoom in so much and see all these different objects. So for me, that's really all I image with now is what I call my big telescope. By the way, I am going to stop periodically and take questions, so I'm happy to do that at different points in the presentation here. You'll see pictures throughout. Are you able to see my cursor on the screen at all? Can you see that? Yeah, okay,
yes,
good.
we can.
So I'm going to show you pictures throughout. So obviously this is me. I live, and you'll see that in a second here, in Onalaska, Texas, about an hour and a half north of Houston, on the second biggest lake in Texas, Lake Livingston. And I'm on the shore that faces south. So that's very convenient in terms of not having obstructions. I've imaged objects down to 6 degrees above the horizon. And so it's nice because the far shoreline that you see there is 8 miles away. So that comes in handy for my imaging. What I'm going to show you here, and this is what eventually I launched into, is imaging the ARP catalog. And you'll see the ARP catalog is 338 different tiny objects. And I started and stopped imaging that catalog 5 or 6 times because it is a bear. It is a real challenge to try to get these small objects captured. You need steady skies and you need to be in focus. And so what you'll see, and I'll show more of these later, this is just a comparison with the image that I was able to get with my 11-inch here in Onalaska, Texas, in my backyard. I do all of my imaging from my backyard. I know a lot of people enjoy getting images remotely, which would be great if I did that, or getting images like from the Chile telescope or other places, purchasing images. But I just like the hands-on of doing it all myself. And so I just do it all in my backyard. And so this shows you just an image, for example, of a galaxy that I took with my 11-inch. And then I'll show side by side the image that Dr. Arp took back in the 60s. This is an image, at the time, this was the world's largest telescope, 200-inch telescope at Palomar Observatory. And so these are excellent quality images, and his resolution is better than mine. But you can see, I've got color, and we've got processing technology now that they didn't have back in those days. So it's kind of fun to compare what you can do in your backyard now to what the state of the art was 50 years ago when they were doing these images, when Dr. Arp was imaging his catalog with the world's biggest telescope. So I talked about this a little bit. I'm going to mention these long focal length targets. I do think it's best, if you're just getting into astrophotography, it's best to start with a short focal length setup. I'm saying 450 millimeters, and that's the length from your lens, or from the camera sensor to your objective lens. Most people are more familiar with the actual diameters of the lens. And so you're talking here about typically 3 or 4 inch telescopes. Long focal length setups, like I say here on the slide, are a lot more difficult for these reasons. Obviously, the size and the weight of the telescope increases. It's much more critical to maintain focus. That focus changes more frequently due to temperature primarily, because the telescope itself, due to temperature, changes length. Much more dew problems as you get more glass, and so you need dew heaters in that case. Tracking is so much more critical because you're zooming in so much more. So having a good quality mount, and the old saying is the mount's the most important, between the mount, camera, and telescope, the mount's the most important thing, and that's definitely the case for these long focal length setups. Guiding becomes more critical. Particularly, I had to get away from just using a guide scope to using OAG guiding, off-axis guiding, because there's too much differential flexure between the guide scope and your main telescope. And once you get long focal length setups, you can't tolerate any kind of differential movement, even if it's slight like that. Wind, which is an issue for me, so I put up wind screens every night before I set up my telescope. And then the seeing, of course. The seeing is so critical. So why do you do it? If it's so much harder, why use these longer focal length setups? Well, and you can see, up in the right-hand corner, this is ARP 142, which colloquially is referred to as the penguin and the egg, as you can probably tell. Those are 2 interacting galaxies. But you can see targets like this that, like you see ARP 142, and you see the details, and you're not able to see this on a scope that's a shorter scope. So you're able to, it opens up your available targets, to go from maybe 100 targets to maybe 2,000 targets, and those targets you can get much closer views of. So it is more difficult. And it isn't something I would launch into when first taking up the hobby, but in time, it's definitely worth launching into that. My purpose for being here tonight, by the way, I'm not trying to sell anything or convince you anything. I'm just trying to share what I know, and I'm happy to do that. Most of you probably have more experience in this field than I do in terms of years, and so I don't pretend to be an expert on any of this, but I'll share whatever it might be useful to know. So, so my background, I retired in 2014. I was an engineer and a project manager. I moved to the lake here from Houston with my wife. My wife picked out the house and location. People, when they see all my images, they think that somehow I picked this location because of the imaging. I didn't get into imaging. I didn't even think about imaging until after I lived here. So that was just a sort of a God gift to me. The fact that I face south over this lake, and the lake itself creates some excellent seeing because of the stability of the lake and the temperature stability. And so that always worked out well. That was just a fortuitous turn for me. Had a lot of hobbies, but my son, as I mentioned, suggested I look into astrophotography. I learned the hobby. I didn't have the benefit of mentors or forums like this one. I just learned from books and websites. And right now I posted about 1,600 images. I'm getting close to 10,000 hours of imaging time, which, if you do the numbers, is about 40% of my total darkness hours. I do get a lot of clear skies here in this part of Texas. We're ideally situated sort of north of the Gulf of Mexico and south of the jet stream. So there are some times, like a few weeks ago, when I had 14 continuous days of clear skies. So I imaged for 14 continuous nights for 10 hours a night. So that allows you to accumulate, this 10,000 hours, pretty quickly. This is my location. This is just a map of showing you where I live in Onalaska, Texas. And my pad is right here. I don't have an observatory. I would love to have an observatory, but I live in a little gated neighborhood, and they have some rules against that. So a couple of key aspects of my location here in the bottom right. So I'm at a declination of plus 31 degrees. And Memphis is probably a little bit north of me, I would imagine. Maybe it's plus 40 or something like that. I don't know exactly. But you'll see how important that declination is when we talk about the ARP catalog, because you can only image the entire ARP catalog as I did if you live close to where I live, because I live almost exactly at the same declination that the Palomar Observatory is at. So if I was much north or south of here, I wouldn't be able to capture all 338 objects. I don't have any obstructions, which is nice. I'm at a Bortle 4.5, which is sort of like a rural area. It's not bad. I mean, for astrophotography, obviously with filters and narrowband, you can kind of get by. And I would love to be in a darker area, but I'm pretty happy where I am. Like I mentioned, the scene is really critical because we have a south wind normally. So normally the south wind comes across this lake for about 8 miles. And by the time it hits us here, we've got some pretty laminar flow. And I think that's why I'm able to, we'll talk about image scale later. I'm violating a lot of the rules of image scale. You're supposed to not get below about 0.8 arc seconds per pixel because of the scene. And I'm going much lower than that because I think my scene here is pretty good. But we'll talk about that and, you know, those sort of the rules here. And then clouds, I talked a little bit about, you know, the jet stream and where that is, but also just locally, if you look at the lake, this is a picture from this past summer, and the lake itself creates its own weather. It's big enough. And so during the summertime, the air heats up along the shores quicker than it does over the lake. And so as that warm air rises off the land, it sucks a lot of the moisture out of the center of the lake. So many times in the summer, there's clear skies over the lake and clouds all around it, as you see in this picture. So obviously I didn't know that either when I moved here, but sometimes it's good to get lucky with some of this stuff, you know? So this is my setup. I set up and take down each night. And I'm not really being facetious here when I said that I did have to work out for a couple of years to get to a point where I was really comfortable carrying all this stuff, because if you carried stuff like this, you know, you're talking about a lot of weight each night, moving around in the dark. So, you know, if you do it every night for 5 years, eventually you get more comfortable doing it. It takes me about 20 minutes to set up and take down. Of course, I have to do a polar alignment. I'll talk about how I do that in a second. You see my windscreens here. They're just PVC pipe with fabric. And I have on my Astrobin side, I've got a special post that talks specifically about the size, material, and how I built those and how I sunk them into the ground so they have sleeves. And so it's really critical I have that. If I get a wind that's say more than 12 miles an hour, I can't image really at all with this telescope. If it's more than about 4 miles an hour, then I need these screens. So I just set up the screens every night because undoubtedly, even if it's calm when I start, it'll pick up as the night goes on. I do have dew heaters, as I mentioned. That's not a big deal, but in Texas, typically when I'm out there at night, it's 90% humidity, and you need a dew heater for that. Once I set this up, then I can control it from the house through a Cat5 cable and Windows Remote Desktop. So, of course, I didn't know about any of this. And when I first started, I spent all night out, literally outside. Well, you know, you don't get a lot of sleep if you're up outside all night. So at least being inside now, that's been a real godsend. It's been a real blessing for me to have this Windows Remote Desktop. And those of you that have tried it know that it's just like being there at the computer. It's so quick and responsive. The only thing I don't have is I can't look up and see the stars, but everything else I can do from the inside once I get it set up. And then, like I said, I try to image every minute of clear sky from dusk to dawn. So these people that say, well, we're about to enter Galaxy season, for me, it's kind of always Galaxy season, because if I don't get it at dawn, I can get it at dusk and vice versa. So it's nice being retired. That's all I can say. My gear, we're talking about these tiny objects. Most of the images I'm going to show today are with my 11-inch, which I show here. It's a Celestron 11-inch Edge HD, which is an f10 scope. I also have a 5-inch, and I don't think people really realize how good you can get images of these tiny objects with just a 5-inch scope. So, you know, if you look at these two images, which I'm comparing, I try to do, you know, apples to apples best I could. And I'm not sure how well it comes across over the link, but, you know, obviously the 11-inch picture is a little better, less noise. But, you know, I'm perfectly happy. I started out with that 5-inch, or what I call the 130 millimeter refractor. And those images still hold up pretty well. And so, you know, you don't have to have an 11-inch a reflector to do this. In fact, in many ways, my 5-inch, which is a refractor, I think the glass on that and The star quality, for example, is better. And there's a lot of positives to that 5-inch. So if you have a 5-inch scope or something like that, you can still take images of the objects I'm going to show tonight. They may not be quite as good, but they're still going to be really good. So I've basically already covered a lot of that. I got an astrophysics mount, which is not a cheap mount. I don't run what's called the periodic error correction. I've done that many times where you can sort of train your mount, and based on your worm gear and how that tracks, you can compensate for that basically. But I'm guiding, so if you're guiding, you know, I just never really saw a huge benefit from that. My tracking is still really good, even, you know, just with that disabled. So I don't mess with that. I do have what I would call like automatic focusers, and you really need that because you know, if you're out there manually focusing, if it's 3 a.m. and you've got to refocus, it's really nice to be able to hit a button to do that. So it's a bit of an expense, but that's one of the things I'd highly recommend. And then we talked about the guiding through the lens, OAG, through the sensor. Filters are expensive these days. They've gone up, the narrowband filters, but I have both Astrodon and Chroma. They're both excellent brands. And then reducers. Now that's kind of a passionate topic for some. I'm very much against using a reducer. You know, a lot of people want to use a reducer to gather more light and add that to their system and change it. I could change my system, for example, from F10 to F7. But when you're talking about the same size object, the only way to really get more light is to increase your aperture. And so the benefit of using a reducer is to increase your field of view. And for these tiny objects, I really don't need to do that. So I don't, if I need an increased field of view, I'll just switch to my other telescope. I'll never use a reducer. And the reason for that is because in all the experiments I've done, I'm always a little bit, even though I've got expensive reducers, I'm a little bit disappointed in especially the star quality. Stars don't quite look as round when I'm using a reducer, for example. The only cameras I have are CMOS cameras, and they're all ZWO cameras. And so I started out with the 1600 and then moved through the progression. And lately, the kind of the state of the art, I guess, is the 6200, which has got a huge sensor. So all of these are good cameras. You know, some are better than others. And I'm not going to get into too much detail on this because I think, you know, if you don't have the cameras yourself and you're not into astrophotography, you're not going to be interested in it. But I'm happy to answer any questions on that. The different cameras all have different sensor sizes, offer different features. Now, this is where I wanted to talk a bit about seeing. So normally the recommendation is to have an image scale between 1 and 2 arc seconds per pixel. And you can see what that means here in terms of on one axis, you've got focal length, and on the other axis, you've got the size of your sensor in terms of the microns, the pixel size. And so, you know, you want to stay between 1 and 2, and I don't want to belabor this too much, but my point is, and you can see on the right here, I'm getting much below 1. And normally what people will tell you is that if you get that low, scene's going to govern, and you're not going to get an improved quality image because it doesn't matter how small your pixel size is or how big your telescope is, but scene's going to control the final result. But I haven't seen that to be the case. I do many comparisons with different camera sensors and sizes, and I think it's because, you know, we're doing so much processing now. We're doing so much processing of these images and eliminating subs that may not be good, and so on and so forth. So I do feel like I'm getting detail that's better than you just kind of expect if you just, you know, read all the recommendations. I'm happy to answer any questions on that. In terms of software, I don't want to get into this too much because I don't know how familiar you are with this, but I use PolMaster for my polar alignment. I swear by that. That's just such a quick and easy. It takes me about 1 minute to do my polar alignment. So that's been real nice. I use with a software called SGP for imaging. None of these softwares are very expensive. And then PhD2 is what I use for guiding. I use the current feature is multi-star guiding, and you can see that here on the screen here, where you're primarily guiding off of one star, but it's using the responses from the other stars as well to help. I do focus, like I say here, every hour because of the temperature change. And you can see my guiding here. This is pretty typical. On a good day, I might get like 0.3 arc seconds or something like that. And here you can see on the bottom, I show the impact of the wind. So on this particular night, and hopefully you can see this, I headed out there. I probably took a nap or something. The wind came up, and you can see in the first part of the trace here how bad that response was when I had no windscreens. And then down here where I say setting up windscreens, that's when I went outside and fixed it. And then after that, things settled down. So it really helps to try to protect. If you're taking these pictures at high focal lengths, at high magnification, it really helps to try to buffer that wind in any way you can. I always, for all of my images, especially galaxy images, sometimes the nebulas I go a little longer, but all my galaxy images, I take 5 hours of total integration time. So 2 hours of the lume filter and then 1 each for the RGB. Now, more and more people are moving to color cameras, and I think that's probably a wise thing, especially if you don't have much time. I still do mono with filters because I think it gives me the best quality, but it does take more time and more effort. So I do 5 hours all the time just because I try to be, as much as I image, I try to be as consistent as I can in terms of all of my practice, whether it's what gain I run the cameras at or what exposure I run. So you see, I almost always use unity gain, 120-second exposures. I image during the full moon all the time, but ARP imaging is not really possible at full moon. But if it's, half moon, I can do quite a bit. So I've done a lot of experiment with percentage moon and how far I have to be away from the moon in order to get good images. And if it's lume, which is the most important for detail, those subs I have to basically save for my best seeing nights with less than 50% moon, as I say here. The RGB, the color is not as critical. And so I can take those with up to like a 75% moon. But I always try to stay about 30 degrees away. And what's really important, and I say here, for good quality, I try not to image more than about 2.5 hours away from the meridian when it's straight up, because then otherwise you're shooting through so much atmosphere. And certainly the lower I get, the closer. So if I'm shooting at maybe only 20 degrees above the horizon, I've got to stay within maybe 1 hour of the meridian because it's just too hard to get a good stable image. I hear some people say on Astrobeam, they say, oh, they set up their telescope, they got their camera running, and then they start thinking about what target they're going to take a picture of. And for the life of me, I can't really understand that, because your clear sky time is so valuable. You want to plan that out. You want to have contingency plans if a certain part of the sky is cloudy. And so I use a piece of software called Astro Planner. There's lots of software out there. I'm not trying to sell Astro Planner. In fact, it reminds me of something like from the 90s, because it's just basically a spreadsheet with a few enhancements. It's not expensive. But what I like about it is that, and you can see, and basically you have to enter all the targets here. I did get some of these from sort of canned lists, but most of them I entered myself. So what you see here is, as the night goes on, and this is the transit time here. So, and I always use military time because before I started the military time, I screwed up so many times when I was setting my alarm for 4 a.m. and I set 4 p.m. So I always use military time. But anyway, this takes you from 8:51 to 9:11 here on the transit column. And you can see all the different targets, and I color code. Astro Planner is nice because you can color code. So the brown ones are targets I've already imaged. The green ones are the ones that are really low to horizon. This one's, for example, at declination of -39. So those are going to be I can only get those if seeing is really good. The priority objects, which are the ones I really want to get, are in the blue. And then the ones that are close to the moon, and the moon is this last column here, is in orange. So anything 30 degrees or less, I color with orange. Oops. And that way, at a glance, I'm trying to go after those blue targets, and that's what I really want to get. Now, a lot of people will automate their target sequencing, and that's not that hard to do. So they'll just put a program in for the whole night. They'll say, I want this target, and that target, and that target. Go to bed, and then they'll wake up and it'll be all done. The only problem with that, with these tiny targets, is that it's many times the target I'm imaging is not even in the SkyAtlas software, and so I kind of have to search for it and find it. And then when you do find it, you want to make sure it's framed properly. So I still I'll take naps between my setups, but when I want to image a target for the first time, I will try to do that kind of manually. Is the way I would say that. So before I go into the programs I use, is there any questions that I could answer at this point in time that somebody might have?
I was curious what the pixel size is on your favorite camera.
Yeah, and that's a great question, and I don't think I have that on here. Yeah, so my favorite camera is the 6200, and that's a full sensor camera, and that one just came out, within the last year or two. And it's so nice because there's no noise, basically. And I would say that my recollection is that pixel size is like 3.7.
Oh, okay. All right.
3.7. Now, the one that I use for most of the images you'll see here is the 294, which is not an expensive camera. And it actually has very small pixel size. I want to say it's like 1 something, but I bin it 2 times. And that's what you see here where I say bin 2,
Right.
which is kind of the default mode for that camera. And I just get better images for tiny targets with that 294 camera. It's a terrible camera for for noise. So if you take a sub and you look at it, you'll say, man, that's terrible. But for some reason, when you integrate all the subs, and of course you do the calibration, that camera actually gives me the best images. And plus, it's got a much smaller sensor. So when I'm dealing with, I try to post 2 images a day. It's a lot of processing. And to do that with a full sensor camera, so I think each sub of that 6200, I want to say it's like 130 megabytes or something like that. So when you're handling hundreds of subs at 130 megabytes a sub, that's a lot of gigabytes. And so the 294 is a little bit nicer camera in the sense of, if I don't have a big object, I don't need a big sensor, and then the subs I get and have to manage and work with are much less. So it makes my job a little easier.
Cool. Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure. Miss Ann?
You had a slide about seeing a few slides back.
Yeah.
If you could go to that one, I couldn't see what was on the y-axis there. So it's focal length on X, but
It's the size of the pixels.
Okay.
The pixel size is on this axis here. So, and what you want to be is you want to be in the orange. So let's say, do you have a telescope, Ann?
Yes.
Do you know what your focal length is?
Yes, I do, but I can't recall the number at the moment.
Oh, okay. So let's say like I've got a small.
Is this data that you found, or is this like from
No, this is manufacturer's data.
Okay, okay.
I steal all my data. I want to spend all of my time imaging. That's all I love. I don't want to tinker with equipment. I don't want to play games with comparisons. I'm not a tinkerer. I just love imaging. So I do a lot of my own comparisons with my own equipment, because I can tell you, and what I find is that a lot of the recommended practice, like initially I was told, well, don't image anything within 30 degrees of the horizon. So I didn't. And then, now I'm imaging within 6 degrees of the horizon. It's good to hear those recommendations, but it's also good to kind of test them with your own equipment. But anyway, on this one, let's say I have my small telescope is 450. So on this axis, on the horizontal axis, on x-axis, you go to 450. And then what that tells you then is that you really want to have a small pixel size in your camera. So it's like, say, 3 or 5. If you've got like 8 or 9, and you can see what it says down here, the light gray, which is where this is, it says objects are undersampled and not enough detail will be seen. So if you've got a small telescope with a big pixel size camera, you're not going to get enough detail. Now, what I'm doing, so I've got a 2800 scope, which is over here, not even on the list, but let's say 2000. And I've got a 3 pixel. So this is telling me that I'm in the dark gray, which is objects are oversampled and guiding will cause issues. But what I'm saying is that I still feel like I benefit. So I kind of push this orange boundary up to the right. And I think partially because it's where I live, and partially because I try to pick good nights for my tough targets. But I also think, like I said, I think the processing, I just think that our tools have got to the point now where we can get crisp images. For example, I do deconvolution on all of my images. So I do think that it helps to have that lower image scale with the data. And there's some nights when I'm sure it doesn't benefit me, but I think many nights it does. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome, man. So I'm going to keep going then. So I wanted to talk about processing. So in my mind, and I'm sure there's more, but there's three main programs I use. PixInsight's the big one. PixInsight's an interesting program. So it's got so many powerful tools. It's like the most powerful program you could ever imagine, with the worst documentation you could ever imagine. And so I don't understand sometimes, the logic of how the program is presented, and I mean, it's just impossible. If you're trying to learn that program, you really, so what I did was I just took like 3 months of time, tried to look at all the online, and I've got books here. By the way, I've got a stack of books, and we can go over that later if you want to know like what are good books, but it's a tough tool to learn, but it's worth the time. If you love astrophotography, it's worth the time to learn PixInsight, because the tools are second to none for that. And you can see what I use it for. So I use it to review the subs. I grade the subs in SGP because that tool is just more efficient. But then I review the subs with the blink tool in PixInsight, and then I calibrate the image, I develop the masters. And by the way, I say in Orange, I try to do this as soon as possible. I used to have a backlog. Well, I still have a backlog, but I used to not develop the masters right away. And now the first thing I do the next morning, if I can help it, if at all possible, is I get the masters done. It doesn't take that long to get the masters done, but you really want to know if you've got a good result, if you've got oval stars, if you've got streaks from airplanes or whatever. And sometimes that object will, if you wait too long, if you wait a month or two, that object will be below the horizon already. And then you got to wait, 6 months for it to come back. So it really helps, to ID, make sure you've got enough information to do your image. If you can at least get the masters done. You don't have to do the whole processing, but just get the masters done. Then I do deconvolution in PixInsight, and noise reduction and stretching. And then I wanted to mention this. That's why I asked for this. So I've given this presentation on the internet before. Some of you may have seen that as part of the Astro-Imaging Channel, but I've added quite a few things. So this is one of the things I want to talk about that I didn't talk about there. So for those of you that own PixInsight, there's a process called StarNet that you can use to de-star your images. Version 1, which is the only version available in PixInsight, if all you do is load the latest version of PixInsight, version 1 is not very good. I mean, it's great. I used it, so I'm not critical of it. It's the best program that I know of for getting starless images. But they came out with version 2 in February, and it is a miracle. It is just blows my mind. I have no idea how they do this. So, and I'll talk about how I do it in a second. But if you own PixInsight, and you really owe it to yourself to look into developing starless images, and I'll explain why in a second. But to do that, the latest version of StarNet is what you want. And to get that loaded, you just have to do a Google search for StarNet. It's free. Go to the StarNet site, download version 2, and install it in PixInsight. It doesn't come with PixInsight. I'm sure it will eventually, but it is a miraculous tool. I just can't believe the technology involved in that. And I'll show you that in a second. So I use PixInsight for all that. Lightroom, some of you may be familiar with Lightroom. I love Lightroom. The latest edition. So Lightroom is primarily for handling lots of images. It's got a great cataloging tool, but it also has easy adjustments. And one of the things it does better than anything else, in my opinion, is detailed masking. They're just one-click masks that you can create so easily. You can create masks in any tool, including PixInsight. But Lightroom, that is, it's worth it to get Lightroom just for that. So I pay like $10 a month for the Adobe suite, which is Lightroom and a bunch of other stuff, and Photoshop. So I use Photoshop for a lot of things. The main one really is what I call layer blending here, where I'm trying to blend different layers. So I want to get back to the starless thing. So this image I just posted here recently, and it's an emission nebula. And what I want to mention for those of you that may not have tried this is that a great way to process these. So in the old days, what I would do is I would just take the subs. Of course, I've got RGB subs for the stars, and I've got my narrowband sub. So this is like with the H2 filter. And so I would have to stretch that H2 image and then add it to the stars. What happens then if you stretch that narrowband image enough to see this narrowband object, this beautiful narrowband object here, is it blows the stars out. So what's really nice is if you use that StarNet program I just mentioned, to take the stars out of the narrowband image. And the StarNet works best on narrowband subs because the stars are so small in those narrowband images. So when I wish I had loaded, I should have showed you the difference between the starred image and the de-starred image, but it's amazing because the de-starred image, you would never have guessed. It takes stars out of the nebula even and repairs them. And it's just amazing how it works. So anyway, you end up with just a narrowband image with no stars. And then you can take your RGB images of the stars, just stretch them a little bit. And you can see these stars are pretty good. They wouldn't look that way if I stretched them at any length. But if you just stretch them a tiny bit, they retain their color and they retain their roundness pretty well. So then you add those tiny stretch stars back to the narrowband image. And by doing that, by taking the stars out and then putting them back in, it just makes it so much easier to get a good quality image, in my opinion. So I just wanted to mention that. So now I'm going to launch into a little bit about the ARP catalog. So I'm going to say some things tonight that'll sound like I'm probably being critical of Dr. Arp. Dr. Arp is a hero to me. And he was kind of a nut in some ways, but he was a man that believed strongly in his own beliefs, and some of the things he did was landmark. And really the biggest, I think, for me anyway, the biggest contribution he had was realizing that these what are called peculiar galaxies are important, and they tell us so much about the universe, and they should be studied. And he was, in my opinion, really, he was one of the first, well, probably the first to really seriously study it, and that's where he issued his ARP catalog. I'll talk a bit about the history. Anyway, American astronomer, got his PhD from Caltech. He was a critic of the Big Bang Theory, didn't believe in that, and didn't believe in standard redshift model. I've got some books here that he wrote about redshift, and we won't talk about that, but probably a lot of his theories are a little bit disproven at this point, I would say. But they're still fascinating to read, and still some of what he said and believed. I think it's just hard to disprove some of the stuff that he came up with. He worked for a long time at Palomar Observatory, and eventually he kind of got banished because of all those strong beliefs. But back in the 60s, he used the world's largest telescope at the time, the 200-inch telescope at the Palomar Observatory, to take images of all of these ARP objects. And they're at a declination of +33, which is very close to where I'm at +1. And this is the telescope. Now you can see here, if there was a person standing there, there'd be a tiny person standing at the bottom of this image. So this is a monstrous telescope. This is not something that you're going to fit in your backyard. This is a 10-story building, probably. So, it's kind of fun to compare images, because this thing, who would have thought that we could even come close to getting the same quality image that Dr. Arp did? It's kind of amazing that our technology allows us to do that. I think it's fascinating. So backing up a bit, so back in 1936, Edwin Hubble published a landmark work called Realm of the Nebula. And he talked about galaxies, but he suggested then, so he recognized that there were some unusual galaxies, but he said that they should be neglected in view of their very limited numbers. So he said, yeah, there's peculiar galaxies out there, but there's just a few of them. We don't need to worry about it. And then the first pioneering work on those peculiar galaxies was done by Zwicky and Vorontsov-Valiamenov in the 1950s. So they actually were first in a way. And then Dr. Arp saw some of that, and it was a passion for him. He just absolutely couldn't get enough of trying to understand why these galaxies were, why they were, why are they so strange? So here's ARP 266 in the upper corner. This is not your classic spiral. Everybody was getting all excited about, the M31s and M33s and all in our galaxy and all the ones that look normal, but he loved these peculiar ones, and he believed there was a lot to be learned from them, and he's right. So his landmark work was published in 1966, and on the internet you can get a complete, electronic copy of that with all the images. I really would love to get a hard copy, but they're hard to find these days, and they're probably, $20 $20,000, something like that. But anyway, I always love at first sight for me. When I first saw the ARP catalog, I don't know, I was doing some astronomy 20 years ago, just as a hobby, and never dreamed at the time that we could actually take the same images that Dr. Arp did. So it kind of instilled in me, maybe in a much smaller scale, the same sort of passion that Dr. Arp had in terms of just falling in love with the nature of these galaxies and what they were. So here's a couple of my favorite Dr. Arp quotes. One is from the preface to the Atlas. He says, "When looked at closely enough, every galaxy is peculiar." And, that's really true. I think, the better our technology, the more we can dig into these galaxies with our own equipment and with the Hubble. We see a lot of fascinating aspects to our own galaxy now, and so there's a lot to be learned. And then this is from one of his more recent books. He said, "For me, the whole lesson of the peculiar galaxies was that galaxies are generally ejected material." Now, the first one here is a favorite quote for me because it's true. The second one is it's a favorite quote for me because just the nerve to say that, to think that. So what we look at today, when I'll show you many of these images of a couple of galaxies that are what we call merging, colliding. Well, he had exactly the opposite view. He viewed that these were galaxies being born. And so he felt like what we see now, he had the exact reverse thought process. He in his mind, these galaxies were being ejected. Now, there's no real theory to explain how they would be ejected. It's a lot easier to understand how they could merge. But it's one of my favorite quotes because I think if nothing else, it says, try to think of things, open your mind up a bit. And maybe he opened his mind up a little too much, but I still find it fascinating that he believed that. So let's talk about the ARP catalog. So this shows you some of the original images. All of the images are in black and white. And they were each taken with exposures from 30 minutes to a second. And they range widely in their field of view. So I'll talk about that here. So 338 objects, they're inverted mono images. So he wasn't into getting pretty pictures. I want to get a pretty picture. He didn't care about pretty pictures. He wanted to get the details. So many times you'll see his cores are blown out. He was trying to really get the contrast up on these, a lot of noise. So they're not what I would call pretty, but they show a tremendous amount of detail. And that's why I love comparing my images to Arp, because his images, we can see a lot more in our own images if we look at his images. The widths of these objects range from 1 degree, which is a really wide width, which is 3,600 arc seconds. And that's what I'm showing up here in ARP 317. That's a 1 degree picture. Range from that, and I say here, that's obviously, you guys probably know this, twice the size of the moon or half the size of the Venus. No, I'm sorry. 1 degree is twice the size of the moon. What I'm saying here is the object width ranges from 1 degree down to 15 arc seconds. So up here on the upper right, that's only 15 arc seconds. So this one up on the right, even though they may look similar, these two images, this one up on the left is about 300 or maybe 220, whatever that is, 230 times more of a field of view. And so, and that's why I say here, that's equivalent. On the left, it'd be 2 times the size of the full moon. On the right, it would be half the size of the planet Venus. So these have and the challenge for us trying to image these is you have to have a system that can do both. You can't just have a system that'll capture the tiny objects. You have to get the wide objects. The declination of these objects range from plus 87 north, which, as most of you know, is basically the North Pole, down to minus 43 south. So the problem, of course, is the further north you are, let's say you're in Wisconsin, you can't reach minus 43 south. Even I can barely reach, minus 43 south. So in my opinion here, this is making a few assumptions, but your imaging location really has to be between plus 10 and plus 32 to get all of these objects. And that assumes at least 15 degrees above the horizon in order to capture that object properly. So if you look at what's made up of these 338 objects, there are some popular objects in here. So there's 11 Messier objects. And that's kind of how I started on my journey, by the way. I started with Messier, then I went to Caldwell, and then I went to others, and eventually got to ARP. So, Messier is a good place to start, because those are the showcase objects. Those are the ones you want to start with if you're just getting into astrophotography. There's 18 Hickson galaxies, which are small galaxy groups. And then there's sometimes ARPs that are within 1 degree of other ARPs. So there's pairs, triplets, quadruplets. And I think sometimes if you look at the objects that ARP captured in pairs and triplets and quadruplets, they're frankly, they're not very impressive. So I think what he did is he took an image, saw he had another interesting galaxy on that same piece of film, and then just added one to the catalog. But I don't know that for a fact. I'm going to take you through this very quickly. He categorized his catalog into these different categories. So the first category here is spiral galaxies. And you can see the different descriptions here. Like he's got 3 arms galaxies. He's got integral sign galaxies and spiral galaxies with companions. Now, I would say if you look at down here, how many he's got, and the number after it is how many entries he has into his catalog. So he's got 30 of these, for example, small galaxies with high brightness companions. Many times those companions are not what I would call true companions. They're just sort of line of sight accidents. And he thought they were companions. He thought they were close by. You know, I guess there's still a possibility that it could be, but the data that we have now, especially with redshift and so on, suggests that many of these so-called companions aren't really companions. And I'll show you some of those here in a second. Those are spiral galaxies. He captured 44 elliptical galaxies. And so, you know, those generally aren't quite as exciting. And you can see, you know, even his descriptions tell you what his mindset was in terms of this catalog. It's like, for example, material emanating from elliptical galaxies. And you can see one up here to the upper right. So this is an example of one that's maybe emanating. So he's got an elliptical galaxy on the right, and then you can see the star stream is interacting with these other galaxies. Now, today we think they're just close to each other, and the gravitational interaction is causing these star streams. That's kind of our view of today's world. He's got a category that's just called galaxies, and it's just, you know, it's galaxies with jets and with narrow filaments and with loops. And so, for example, the upper right, here's a galaxy with a loop. And I'm fascinated, and I'll show you later. So as I got more into this, I started to kind of come up with my own categories. So I've got, for example, a screen of all galaxies with loops, and it's not just the ARP objects. There's many objects out there with loops, and those loops are fascinating to think about how they formed. I love to, and there's simulations out there that you can run to kind of show when these galaxies approach each other, and as they rotate, how those star streams can curve and do these loops. It's pretty fascinating what the technology is these days for simulation. And then his fourth category is double and multiple galaxies, which he talks about chains. So for example, ARP 330, this is a chain of galaxies. And chains are fascinating. And I've got a separate slide to show that later because there's different beliefs on chains. Some people, you know, it's just interesting to think about, well, why are they in chains? Were they born that way? Are they somehow rearranged that way? How did they become so lined up? And so, you know, generally the thought process is they were sort of part of the same broader cluster in terms of the galaxy clusters, and they were born kind of at the same time. But some of them are lined up so interestingly, you wonder if maybe there's something else maybe going on there. And then the final category, just 6 objects of miscellaneous. So Messier 82, which is what I show here, is ARP 337, is in the so-called miscellaneous category, primarily because of that dramatic the H2 emissions that's coming out of the core. So that gives you just a brief overview of ARP catalog. And so now I'm going to go into a section where I'm kind of comparing my images to the ones that ARP took. But before I do that, I've got a little fun sort of interlude here. So I thought this would be fun to wake people up in case they're not paying attention here. So this is a slide I put together a few weeks ago. It's something I call Cars of the Cosmos. So there are some sky objects that car companies have used in their logo. So for example, some of you may know Subaru just took the Pleiades and put it into their car logo as that. Of course, Saturn, you can see Saturn is the same as Saturn. I didn't know Ferrari was so close to the Horsehead Nebula. I never realized that. I don't think that was a plan. And probably the rest of these aren't really plans. I don't think Tesla would meant that. But I tried to find space objects that were close. And I was kind of stretching it after a while towards the end, like the Chrysler one is not really very close, or the BMW one. Yeah, that was just sort of a fun, you can tell I get bored sometimes, so that was kind of a fun thing. Okay, so we're going to move on to talk about my work. So all of these galaxies that I've imaged are on X, and that's why I say each of the 338 that I've imaged are listed individually. So I show the equipment that I use to take the image, the dates, the acquisition details, which include the filters and the exposure times and the binning. There's always a sky plot showing the field of view. You can always download the full image if you want. And then I always show a comparison between my image and the original ARP image. And I just like to do that because it's fun for me to do that. I'm not trying to, it's not a bragging thing, because many times his image is much better than mine. It's just, I think it's just an interesting comparison. And then I always try to provide a description of the object. You can see here, this is an example for ARP 244, because oftentimes, especially, so the showcase objects like ARP 244, which I show here, a lot of people know about those, but many of these ARP objects don't get as much exposure. So it's kind of fun to share some of the information about the object, what it is, how big it is, how far it is away. And I do that in the description part. So this just gives you a feel. These are the 338 ARP images that I've got loaded up. I don't expect you to be able to see any of that, but that just gives you a feel for the different types. You can see on here, you got loops, you've got different distortions, star streams, and that's what I love about the ARP catalog. It's got just so much variety and so many different things. So we're going to talk about some comparisons now between my images and ARP. So, just on a broad basis, if you think about what advantages ARP had and what I had. So ARP's got a 200-inch objective lens. So he's able to capture these faint details much greater, and I'll show that in some of my images. The advantages I have is I was able to image in color, and he didn't have access to color at the time. And, I didn't really appreciate how valuable color is and how much you can learn just from the color in terms of looking at the yellow stars, the blue stars, and I'll show that. Also, bright details, he kind of blew out his bright details because he wasn't interested in, for example, in looking at the core. Well, to me, the core sometimes is, one of the more interesting parts of the galaxy. So it is fun to see that. And then I'll show some comparisons to Hubble. Now, it's kind of intimidating to compare your image to a Hubble image. So I say advantage to Hubble, everything, yeah. But, Hubble does have a limited field of view. And then the colors sometimes on the Hubble can be a bit odd. And I think it's because of the lenses. I think they're trying to maybe replicate RGB sometimes. I don't know if they always have RGB. Sometimes, though, their colors are just a little bit off. But again, I compare to the Hubble sometimes if I can, because the Hubble just shows so much more detail, and I can see more detail in my image if I've got the Hubble to kind of help me along in that respect. So in terms of faint details, I mentioned the ARP advantage. So this is ARP 4, and you can see, part of the thing to keep in mind is that I'm only imaging for 5 hours. I say only, it's still a long time, 5 hours. But obviously I can get more details if I image longer. I choose not to do that. So if you look at ARP's image, he's got a lot more detail in this very dim galaxy. This is one of what they call, this category is called the low brightness category of there's like 6 of them, low brightness galaxies. So being low brightness, it's hard for me, if you look at mine, to capture the whole image. Whereas, you can see the detail. He's got some great detail. It looks kind of noisy. It looks got spots in it, but I like the detail he shows here. Now, obviously this little tiny galaxy, which he would say is a companion, but in reality is much further away, is kind of blown out in his image, but it actually shows up better in my image. So that's ARP 4. This is another example. I just love these what I call super long star streams. This one is about 700,000 light years long, which, if you think about it, it's just mind-boggling. In ARP's image, you can see it, plain as day, really. You don't even have to squint. It's just right there. It's connecting these 2 spiral galaxies. And what you'll find oftentimes when these are interacting, not only do you have a star stream between the 2 galaxies, but you've got star streams that extend beyond that because of the gravitational pull. Now in mine, yeah, I can kind of see a faint star stream, but frankly, it's just not too impressive. And that's why I like, having the ARP image to look at and compare against. So certainly ARP's got an advantage for those faint details, but color, here's a good example. This is an easy one. This is ARP 337. So it's a good one to say, like if you didn't have color, like so when Arp looked at this image, I'm not sure exactly what he was thinking or how he kind of digested that. But certainly when you have the color, it tells you so much more about what you're seeing in terms of the dust lanes. You can see those brown dust lanes in there, and then also the pink emissions. And so, that's why I said color really pays off in terms of our technology today. And here's another example. So Arp's image, he's got more detail, but it's harder to tell what these components of this Arp galaxy are. But if you look at mine, you can actually see that some of these are actually big emission nebula that are pretty and pink, and they're just the stars are interacting, even some of the blue as well. So I do think that it wasn't until I started doing these comparisons that I really was thankful for our technology today to have that ability to see color. And even for this one, which is a fairly simple object, but again, you can see the purple, the yellow, and the blue areas, which to me are much more interest, and even the stars, whereas Arp, you've got the black and white. So that's colors, and this is just another one I threw in there. Now bright details. Now this is a good example. I showed this on my very first slide, but this is a good example of where his core is blown out. So he's imaging it to overexposing it to get all of these details, but he kind of missed some really interesting stuff. So this galaxy has actually got something called a nuclear core, and there's tremendous star formation and star generation going on right around the core. And so the core itself is yellow, but then around it, you see, I don't know if well you can see it in your image, but you can see pink and purple and blue of all of the star formation. And then you've got these dust bands going out on each side. So one advantage I have is, and I say it's we, with our equipment, is we can see these bright details better than Dr. Arp could. Same with this one. You can see again in Dr. Arp's image, the white center of this galaxy is kind of blown out. Whereas here, you can see you got a bar in the middle, and you got a lot of interesting star clouds and star clusters that are being formed, in the plane of that galaxy there. So that's, some of the bright details. Now here's one where I've got all three, and this is where it gets a bit intimidating to actually compare to the Hubble, because, nothing's gonna, look at the resolution of the Hubble. The more I look at these Hubble images, it absolutely blows me away that the Hubble, obviously it's in space, as it doesn't have our atmosphere to deal with, but it's only until, in my opinion, it's only until you're actually doing these images and trying to get good stars that you really understand the advantage that Hubble has of these tiny stars. I mean, just look at this one star here, how big it is in my eye, and look at the Hubble one. So you can see Arp, Arp had an interesting image there, and then I was able to capture, some detail and color. I was pretty happy with the scene on this one. The scene was pretty good because this is a very, very tiny object. But the Hubble obviously blows everything away. And so that's, I think it's useful to compare. And I can actually see more in my image if I just go, take a look at the Hubble as well. This is another one. And again, it's kind of intimidating to compare against the Hubble. I'm not going to be able to capture the color and the resolution. So Arp is on the left, and then my image is in the middle, and then the Hubble is here. And it just shows you, look at this galaxy at the Hubble on the lower right and how detailed that is. Arp and we couldn't even, get anything on that. And so, again, it's a bit intimidating, but it is what it is. I don't spend, my telescope is a little bit cheaper than Hubble's too, so that helps. So a couple of things that I saw in the course of doing this catalog that took me about 4 years to finish. One which surprised me is moving stars. So you don't think about space being kind of a dynamic place, right? You think of it all being static. But in some of my comparisons, the stars have actually moved. So when Dr. Arp took this 50 years ago, this is what it looked like. Now this is my image here. So this orange star, and I've got the arrows there to show it, has actually moved enough in 50 years for us to detect a movement. Now, most of the other stars haven't. But apparently this one is close enough and at enough of an angle, or it's moving fast enough, or whatever. And when I first saw this, I was really perplexed. But then, if you do some research, it's not too surprising to be able to see this type of movement And it's cool to have the ARP benchmark 50 years ago to go back to now, because it's a snapshot in time that was frozen and that we're able to kind of compare against. So that I think is really neat. So now I get into what I call dubious companions. So, and again, I'm not trying to be just throw rocks at Dr. Arp, because I do admire him so much. But so these galaxies, this is a good example. So all of these that you see here, Dr. Arp would say, have nearby companions. And all of them, you know, the redshift calculations show that they're at different distances from us. Now, of course, that doesn't mean much to Dr. Arp because he didn't believe in the redshift, so that's not going to help. But there's other ways that you can look at these and tell sometimes. And one of them is just by looking at the size. So oftentimes, like here, ARP 127. So if I remember right, you know, this blue galaxy, which we have good data on, is maybe 60,000 light years in diameter. So if you look at this galaxy here, which has a bit of structure to it, it's not just just a bland dwarf galaxy. So this one, if you think this is 60, then this one's going to only be about 15 or 20. And there's going to be no galaxies out there with this kind of structure that are that small. So sometimes you can kind of look at the galaxy, and the same with this one here, ARP 127. So the big galaxy is not terribly big. The small one has so much structure here. And so if you believe those are at the same distance, this would have to be very tiny. And in reality, I think in both these cases, this smaller galaxy is just simply much further away. And it does look like even the right one, it looks like they're interacting. And one thing I've learned from looking at all these ARP objects is that, nature has a way and our mind has a way. Our mind wants to think these are interacting. They want to think that these are close. And oftentimes in my images, I'll see the same thing, and you'll see like what I would call like a happy accident. It's just things that get superimposed that are not necessarily right next to each other. Now, what's interesting, so here's another one that, it's really hard. I think when ARP saw this, he called this a jet coming out of the galaxy, which it kind of looks like based on his image. Now, if you look at mine, it looks more like you got one galaxy here, a blue galaxy, and then you got an edge-on galaxy that's a yellow galaxy. So, to me, it doesn't so much look like a jet. So the colors here, I think, do help. And then the redshift also shows that those are galaxies at different distances. This is a really interesting one because this one was the subject of a lot of papers at the time. So ARP said that see this here where the jet is coming out of so this is a galaxy merger, or as ARP would say, a galaxy ejecting. And in his mind, this was a jet that was being ejected from the galaxy. Now, when I took my image, obviously you can see I had no jet. So I was a little disappointed in that. What happened to the jet? And why can't I capture that? What's wrong with my image? Well, it turns out that many times when we take our subs, you'll see asteroids on our subs move across the screen. And in the 30 seconds or so that ARP took his image, it turns out there is an asteroid that what are the chances an asteroid would end up right at the core of this galaxy when he's taking that picture? But you can check the papers. So like 20 years later, after ARP published his book, a scientist went back and actually found the asteroid that was there at the time and explained that mark that was in ARP's image is actually an asteroid trail. So again, Dr. ARP was so convinced that was a jet being ejected from the galaxy, but it was actually just an asteroid trail. So that kind of does it for my comparison to ARP, but then, I have a little bit of time. So I just wanted to show you maybe a few other things that I found to be interesting in terms of the work that I was doing and the different types of galaxies are out there. And so I'm just going to run through these. These posters are all in my Astrobin. I have a poster file there. So one of these is what I call antenna galaxy type. So most of you are probably familiar with the antenna galaxies. This is ARP 244. This is the upper left-hand corner. This is a famous pair of galaxies that is so much fun to image. And when I first saw that, I was just completely blown away. But it turns out I mean, certainly we're fortunate because that pair of galaxies is so close to us and we can get such good images. But it turns out that that's not a unique type of merging pair of galaxies. And, you know, given the fact that we've got this huge universe and billions of galaxies, you wouldn't think it was the only one. So sure enough, you know, through my imaging, and you see a lot of these are in the ARP catalog, but some of them aren't. There's quite a few galaxies out there that are in the process of merging that look like the antenna galaxies. And the common criteria I have in the lower left corner, you know, they have two distinct cores, both are similar in size. They all have star stream bridges. And then the key thing is the long star stream tails. And, you know, it's just fun to see all these different galaxies in the process of merging. This is something that I call late stage mergers. So while this is an early stage when they're just first approaching each other, these are all galaxies that are past that stage. And sometimes you can see the evidence of that in terms of the dust lanes being tremendously distorted and these star stream, and these are the common characteristics: an asymmetric overall shape, no clear sign of any previous galaxy structure. Things have progressed so much that basically everything's coalesced into a big ball. There's no spiral disk, and it's pretty chaotic. And so one of the things I've done is try to, I'm not a scientist by any means, but I've tried to put these into maybe a sequence of what I call stage A through stage D. And I've got many more listed in my Astro Insight, but stage A is where I would say there's a long bridge. So you've got many galaxies out there which have a long star stream bridge between them. And then you've got many galaxies in stage B which just have a short bridge. So, you know, your mind would think maybe these are galaxies that are coming together. And then eventually stage C is where the cores are actually touching. And there's quite a few that actually look like that. And then finally is the stage here is where they're coalesced. And the reason I show this, and one of the reasons, I think the most interesting reason, is that I think, and most people I think today think of this as a progression from left to right. But Dr. Arp would tell you this is a progression from right to left, that these are galaxies that are ejecting. And it's interesting to kind of play that mind game. And well, maybe this is how these galaxies started. You know, they started as one big ball and they separated. You know, it's just, that was what Dr. Arp thought. And he went to his grave insisting that that's how it was. And so I think that's an interesting kind of mind game to play there. We have talked about loops for a little bit, and there's some really fascinating galaxies out there with loops. You can see like 7319. It's got multiple loops and look at ARP 305. I just am fascinated by how these galaxies, and if you look up, a number of scientists have done the simulation to show how these are formed. Generally, these galaxies are approaching one another. And you basically, if I go back to the previous slide, you have something like this here, where you've got these long tails, and then all of a sudden the galaxy makes another pass and it bends that tail around. And that's what you're seeing here, is when these tails bend around because these galaxies are passing each other. And it's just fascinating. The universe gives us these different snapshots in time. We can't see the process start to finish, but it's like if an alien was looking down at the human race and, you know, they saw a baby here and a old person like me there, and just trying to figure out, well, how does this all come together? How does this progress? This is a category I call irregular spirals. So this is kind of an interesting hybrid between an irregular galaxy and a spiral galaxy. These are all between 25 and 50,000 light years wide. And, you know, the way I like to think of this, and I'm not sure if this is right or not, but it looks to me like these are galaxies that are just starting to take a spiral shape. And they've got a certain spiral structure to them, a certain core, but, you know, it's pretty poorly defined. And in all cases, they're all blue, you know, not all, but a lot of blue stars you see here because of, you know, in theory anyway, the recent star formation is what's led to that. This is some of the chains I mentioned before. I love just imaging galaxy chains. I don't know why I'm so fascinated with these chains, but it's kind of interesting to see how they, a lot of them sort of line up, you know, in kind of a curving row. And I'm sure that's just coincidence, but it's amazing how many of those are out there like that. And then these nuclear rings, I mentioned that before too. Those are kind of fun. So this, if you can dive into the core of some of these galaxies, you can see tremendous star formation going on. And it's fun that the equipment that we have in our backyards allows us to get a window into the detail of these cores and what's going on and the power of that process. The colors, you hear I've blown them up in the middle, but just the brightness and showing the primarily the blue star formation area, sometimes they're white. I find that to be interesting. Rings are probably one of my favorite DSO objects, collisional rings. And when I first heard about how collisional rings are formed, I actually didn't believe it. And I still have a hard time believing it. And some of you may be, more experts than I am, but basically the theory here is that one galaxy hits another galaxy head on along its polar axis. And basically what you see here are the holes left behind after the galaxy has been impacted. So for example, up here in the upper left corner, and you can usually see the culprit, it's like a hit and run. So you got this galaxy here that's moving left to right, took out the center of this galaxy and it's moving on. And you can see that in a number of these. And it wasn't until I put them all on the same page that I started to visualize that, yeah, this is probably true. There's enough out there where you've got this unique ring with a void in the middle. You've got a nearby galaxy that looks like it's probably the galaxy that actually hit the other one. And then in the rings, you often have offset cores, which are probably from the remnants of the actual galaxy that was the original galaxy. So these collisional rings I find to be very fascinating. They're very small, and you can see I've got all these to scale. So they're all less than 100,000 light years. So it doesn't happen. It's not going to happen like with our galaxy and M31 when we collide someday. That'll be more of a kind of a merger. But for these here, usually you have a bigger galaxy and then a very small one, like maybe 100,000 light year galaxy and a 20,000, and one hits the other one just right and leaves that void ring in the middle. I just find that to be very interesting. This is something that maybe I was drinking too much one night, but it's interesting to see. So we know that hexagons take their shape in nature, right? You can see honeycombs of bees. You can see, Saturn, the poles of Saturn. Hexagons are kind of a powerful thing, but we also see them in galaxies. And if you look at this, so I'm just going to kind of flip back and forth. So this is what I'm talking about. Now, maybe in some cases here, I'm kind of seeing things, but if I flip back and forth, I do see those hexagon shapes in some of these. And so, certainly you see straight sides to some of these. For example, a good one is the upper left-hand corner, it's 3521. You see that bright area there? To me, that's not a disc. That looks like a hexagon to me. So, it's just kind of fun once you image enough structures to put them on the same page and see what commonalities they have and what things they have in common, because the physical process behind all these should be the same. And so you'd think that, eventually things would start replicating like that. So anyway, that's just kind of a fun little treat. I wanted to show before I left, and I'll leave some time for questions here, but I just wanted to, we talked about galaxies. I want to talk about a few other things, because life's not always about galaxies. So planetary nebula are also fun targets, and it's especially fun if you're in the city, because these are different planetary nebula, and they're bright. So these are bright, and you can take them with narrowband filters, and you can do it from the city. And, for the longest time, I was always confused, if you look at the shapes of these planetary nebula, about what is the process behind these, and why are they all different shapes? And I'm not going to pretend like I know everything here. But best I can tell, because I've been, again, trying to steal from these papers and people that have done this for a living and know what they're talking about. But, I do think there's different mechanisms here. So on the very right, you've got what's called a spherical PM planetary nebula. And this is where you've got a central star that has no companion. It's all by itself. And you form this nice sphere. It doesn't happen a lot, but when it does happen, it's really pretty. It looks like a big soap bubble or a ball out there. So it's basically a nice sphere. Most of the time, though, you do have a companion. So it's not just a single central star, but you've got a companion. Now, if that companion is inside the envelope of the gravitational pull for these two that are rotating, you end up with a simple ellipse, or an elongated elliptical planetary nebula, generally with a ring around it. So as opposed to the right side, where you just basically have like a sphere with a very thin rim, here you've got a thicker rim, And many times, sometimes it's circular, but many times it's elliptical. And then if your companion is outside the envelope, that's when it really gets interesting. And up here in the little diagram is where I was trying to show you what happens here. Basically, you start getting a bipolar flow. So you end up having a structure that has a ring to it. And then along this polar axis, you've got two lobes that expand and grow. And sometimes they grow so much that those lobes actually blow out. And so when we look at these kinds of nebula down here that are probably familiar to some of you, you can see it's not just the ring that we're seeing these lobes that are expanding. And so, for example, M76, if you look at, this is like a side view. So you can see the side view of the torus, and then you can see left and right those two lobes that are expanding. The same with this one here. And then if those lobes expand too much, eventually those two lobes will blow out. So these nebulae here show you where the ends have basically blown out, and you don't have anything left anymore. It basically just dissipates after a while. And then this last one here is where you can have multipolar. So over different periods of time, it doesn't just stick in this bipolar direction, the axis changes. And so you get these interesting sort of butterfly type shapes. So I wanted to show this, not to get deep into the morphology of planetary nebula, but just to show you that once you have a long focal length system set up, it's not just about galaxies. You can actually get interesting pictures of these nebula as well. And then this is a recent poster where I thought it would be fun. So one of the things we can take pictures of is star clusters. And it's fun to do that within the Milky Way, but it's also possible to take pictures of globular clusters that are outside the Milky Way. And this is hard for you to see, so I don't want to belabor it, but these are different, like M31. And then in yellow, I've got marked all the globular clusters. They're very small, they're very tiny, and they're very hard to see. And it's more just a kind of an exercise more than anything else, because once these galaxies get more than about 5 million light years away, it's very hard to see these clusters anymore. Oh, and then this is what I posted the other day. This is just, these are what they were called TIE galaxies, because they look like TIE fighters of the Star Wars universe. So it's just a little fun thing, I threw together. So with that, I think I'll stop and see if you have any questions. I haven't been following the chat, so I don't really know if there's been anything on there that we need to talk about or not.
All right, Gary. Well, thank you very much. This is fascinating, and I have been cruising your AstroBin web pages. Well, you got started. I finally figured out how to look at the ARP catalog.
Could I just take a minute here? I just wanted to put a plug in for some of these books that have benefited me so much that might be useful for some of your folks if they're going to go down this road. So let me just show you a few, and hopefully they'll come across okay. So this one here, this is called the 100 Best Astrophotography Targets. And if you're just starting out, this is really a good book because it shows you what they all look like. It tells you how to capture them. When I first got this book, I was like, 100 targets? I'm never going to be issued. Why would I want 100? I thought maybe there were 10. I didn't know. So that's a good book though to get started. And then this one here is what I use a lot, and it's called the Astrophotography Sky Atlas. And this is a good one because it has all kinds of maps. Some of the maps are really interesting because they actually show you, they're all sky maps, of course, but some of them actually show you like the distribution of the clusters in the sky. And I'm not going to find them, but generally these maps, and I think some of you have seen it, but they actually are pretty good at showing you different, a small piece of the sky, and then you can see where the nebula are, where the galaxies are, and it actually has a nice list of targets in there as well. So that's been a good
data in that one too.
What was that?
But they have image information about object brightness and stuff for the
no, that was really helpful for me. And then you probably, those of you that have that use PixInsight, you probably know, but you probably need more than just what comes with PixInsight because they don't do a good job documenting. So I do benefit from this one. This is called Inside PixInsight by Warren Keller. It's not perfect, you know. I think it's not maybe the most user friendly, but I really like it a lot. And then this one is there's been several, but this one here is called Mastering PixInsight, and that's also, I think, you know, a good one to have if you're gonna spend this much time on a hobby. You know, spending a few bucks on a book, I think is well worth it to help you get a better view of that. So those are just some of them. I've got more here, but those are some of the ones that I've really benefited from over the years.
Gary, if you don't mind, take a look through some of the chat comments, see if there's any questions there you want to take.
Yeah, so yeah, Susan says, yeah, Dr. Arp has images of 30 different guys. Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to launch into imaging that catalog until you are really committed, because once you get down the road to about 100, it gets to be a long slog. And yeah. So it says, actually, I'm a lover of the Cepheid period change analysis. Can we get CCD images of these types of stars from your collection? That's a good question. I don't know. I have to think about that. I haven't gotten into that part of the hobby. I know that that's a big so many people are into that. So I don't know. That's a good one. And so my email address, yeah, can I type that in?
Yeah, you can.
And of course, you know, it's on Astroban. You can contact me there as well. But this is my uh-oh. Can you guys see that? It says a direct message. I don't think I meant to do that. I'll do it to everyone. Hold on. Hopefully that shows up.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions. And then if you have a 85 millimeter, yeah, 600 focal length, what camera pixel size would you recommend? Yeah, that's a good question. So what I want to do is I'm just going to go, you guys can't see this. I'm just going to go back to my slide where I showed scene. And so, you know, I'm just looking at the pixel size there. So based on that chart, yeah. So I would say, you know, pixel size maybe from 3 to 4. So like I've got my 1600. 1600 is an old camera. I still like it. It does a good job with everything except really bright stars. It's got a kind of a micro lens reflection issue, but the 1600 camera from ASI, from ZWO, is a you should be able to get a reasonable price on that. But I would say something in the 3 to 4 micron range there would be the best.
Well, if y'all
Anything
want,
else?
don't be shy. If you want to ask a question and unmute your microphone and ask it rather than typing it in chat, that's fine too. Gary, we really appreciate you spending the time with us this evening. And
wait, somebody was trying to say something.
This is Freddie. Yes. When I just the question got off my mind. Sorry.
It's fine. So,
hello, Gary. Hello.
Hello.
I'm Pradeep from India.
Oh.
Okay. So actually, this lecture is very interesting to me. And in the last of all, you have said about the globular cluster. the collection from Arp, and I have read some papers of Arp like in 1955, 1957, and whatever it may be. And all these papers related light curve analysis of variable star like RL Lyra and Cepheids. And so regarding this, I want to know that is there any possibility to, in your collection or in future, do you have planned to collect RL Lyra and Cepheids? Actually, if I have some CCD images in BVRI filter, if possible, then I would like to process those images using V4. So that is why I am written something in the chat box.
I see. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what would be involved in that. So I have to, before I would commit to anything, I'm always happy to share, whatever I have. I'm not trying to make any money off of any of this stuff. And I'm happy to help you, but I do have to, I don't understand yet how much work would be involved in that in terms of getting images of those stars. But if you send me an email, I'll be happy to work with you on that.
Okay. Thank you. And do you have any images of the globular cluster M3 and M5
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah. I've tried to image every globular cluster I can. So I do have most of them that are visible to us. Yeah. In fact, if you go to the Astrobin site, I've got a long list. I probably have 200 globular clusters that I've imaged. So you can look at, and they're all in one collection. And I've got all the information. Yeah, you can just bring it up. So maybe there's not that many. I don't know, but go down further to, it's in alphabetical order. So if you go down further, Aspirin doesn't have a good cataloging tool, so you have to go. I've got a lot of Galaxies things. So just go down further. There we go.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I've got an extragalactic one. And this is just the different globular clusters. So I don't actually remember how many I have there. I probably only have about 100. I don't remember. They're fun. For those of you that have tried imaging clusters, it's a bit of an acquired taste. So the first few times I did it, I was like, why would anybody want to look at these? But the more you do it, the more you appreciate some of the subtle, you can bring one of them up like that one. Some of the subtle differences. Now this was a tough one. Omega Centauri is tough because it's so low on the horizon. Most of you realize it's a southern hemisphere object. So it's really hard to get crisp images of Omega Centauri. So I tried the best I could, but it's not easy to get a real crisp image of that one because I can't remember, is it like -40 or something? I can't remember what latitude it's at. So, but it's fun to see all those stars, right? All the different colors and all the stars. And I thought it would get old after a while once you start, imaging all these different galaxies. Because if you don't look carefully, it's like any other hobby, it kind of all looks the same, but they're really not all the same. If you look carefully at those clusters, I really got into it for a while. It's like every one of these objects I would get into for a time and then lose interest. My attention span is about 6 months or so. But I've got my numbers up here. So yeah, I've got 70 globular clusters, 130 open clusters. So there's not that many clusters.
Okay, my question came back to my memory. When you said you focus every hour, do you do automatic focus or you do it yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't like automatic focus. So if I'm up, I prefer to do manual because I can watch that with SGP. You can see how it'll show you. I forget what the actual metric is, but it's basically the width of the star. I forget what it is, FHM something, full, half width, full something. But it'll show you a plot of that with each image. And so if your plot is horizontal or moving downwards, you don't want to touch your focus. But if it's slowly, what I see on most nights, when I might, like here, I might start, and I apologize, I think in Fahrenheit, not Celsius, but I might start at 60 Fahrenheit and go down to 40 in the middle of the night. So over an hour's time, you can see that start to creep up after a while. If you do a focus, and after about 30 minutes, you can see it start to creep up. So then, I let it, because every time I do that, every time I refocus, it takes, about 2 minutes. It doesn't sound like a lot, but you don't want to do it a lot. So I don't really want to have automatic if I can help it, because if I'm up, because sometimes it doesn't need it. And other times it may need it more often. Usually if I do it automatic, I will say an hour. And typically I don't have to focus more often than an hour, except at the beginning of the night. If you just, I probably have a unique problem. So my telescope, I keep in the garage. Well, I put it into the garage a few hours before I'm going to image, so it temperature adjusts. But it never completely temperature adjusts. So that first hour I'm outside, I probably have to focus several times. But then once you get about 10 or 11 or 12 o'clock at night, then it's like once an hour. And then once I hit about 3 a.m., then I don't have to focus anymore because it doesn't really change much. So yeah, automatic focusing is great, but I only do it. I only do that when I'm not near my computer. If I prefer, I don't know, I prefer to do everything manual if I can. I don't know why. Just funny that way.
Thank you.
Sure. Well, I want to wish, those of you that, especially those of you that are thinking about getting into astrophotography, it's a tough hobby, but I don't think there's a more rewarding hobby. And especially if you can go with a short focal length scope, and if you can get some cameras and filters to do some narrowband images, because you can do narrowband imaging from the city or from a lighter area. And so that's how I would start. And I think you'll find it to be very rewarding. Treat it as a long-term hobby, though. Don't treat it like you're going to get an image. Don't promise somebody you're going to send them a calendar at the end of the year. Just take your time and try to learn and have the long-term in mind. Don't. So one of the things that I didn't mention that I try to do, I never open up my train. Never open up my train. At first, I'd switch cameras out. I would clean things. I never, like on that right now on my setup, I've had that camera on there for 6 months at the same flats. And if you don't touch it like that, it's a luxury, I know, because some of you, if you set up at a remote site, you may not be able to do that. But for me, let me just put it this way: I sacrifice some things and some objects I just can't get now, because I don't want to switch my cameras out. I want to keep them there, because I found that it's not just the calibration, it's the collimation for this big scope. If I get the collimation spot on, which it is now, and I don't touch it, and I don't take the camera off and so on, I can get some really nice images. But if I start messing around like that, so I try to do things that make it an efficient to image. And one of those things is not to try to change, take the camera on and off very much.
Well, thank you very much, Gary.
Sure.
There aren't any more questions. I'll remind you that our meeting on April the 1st will be at the Bosch Planetarium, formerly known as the Pink Palace, and we're looking forward to that. It'll be a live in-person meeting and presentation, and like I said, we are going to try to incorporate the Zoom live portion of it, or something similar to that. Maybe it's just going to be a live broadcast over YouTube or something. We're not sure what we're going to do with that part yet, but we're going to try to integrate as much of this online activity as we can into our in-person meeting agendas. So I thank you very much for coming tonight.
Rick, I just want to say I took away from something from this too, so thank you for that. So one of the things I love to do is work with kids, and frankly, each week I post an image on a local Facebook site for our small town, and so we get a lot of interaction that way. But I think it would be great to get a telescope. See, I can't use my telescope for group sessions because I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to haul my big heavy telescope out there. But after watching what you guys do, I think what I want to do is just buy a nice, 6-inch telescope, like reflector, like I used to have before I sold it, and have some sessions for the youth, because I admire that you do that, and it sounds like you had some success doing that. And there's nothing like teaching it to kids. They just absolutely eat it up and love it. So I'd love to do more of that. So thanks for motivating me to do that.
All right. Did I tell you about the Stellina telescope we're using?
Yeah.
It's worth looking into.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank y'all very much, and look forward to seeing you in person next month at the Pink Palace. And y'all have a good evening and have a good weekend.
Bye-bye all.